The first time my neighbor called 911 on me, I was standing in my own driveway holding a gallon of milk in one hand and a bag of dog food in the other, watching her report my pickup truck like it was a stolen armored vehicle. I remember looking down at the gravel under my boots, then up at the white farmhouse behind me, trying to understand how a man could somehow be trespassing on land his name was printed all over. That was the moment I learned that a lie does not have to be believable. It only has to be delivered with enough confidence and the right folder in your hand. My name is Jack Holloway, and at the time I owned 12 acres outside a little town called Cedar Run, Kentucky, a place with one gas station, 2 churches, and enough gossip to cross the county line before breakfast. I bought the property because it was the exact opposite of the subdivision I had spent 20 years trying to escape. No shared pool, no matching mailboxes, no committee deciding whether my shed was emotionally compatible with the neighborhood. Just pasture, oak trees, an old barn, and a rust-red Chevrolet Silverado that had survived 2 engines, 1 divorce, and more bad decisions than I care to admit. Across the road lived Diane Pritchard, a woman who dressed like every day included a surprise television interview. She wore pressed jackets in July, pearl earrings while taking out the trash, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. When I first moved in, she brought me a lemon pie and told me Cedar Run Estates believed in maintaining standards. I thanked her, ate the pie, and assumed she was just one of those people who needed a title even if nobody had elected her to anything. 3 months later, she knocked at my door carrying a binder thick enough to stop a bullet and informed me that my truck violated residential appearance rules. I laughed because I honestly thought she was joking. She did not. Diane told me commercial-style vehicles were prohibited under the Cedar Run Property Association covenant, then pointed at the magnetic sign on my driver's side door for my small plumbing business. I told her there was no association attached to my deed, no covenant in my closing paperwork, and no world in which a woman from across the road got to tell me where to park my truck. Her smile tightened. She said, "Mr. Holloway, people always think rules do not apply to them until enforcement begins." I should have taken that sentence more seriously. Instead, I closed the door and went back to fixing a leaking kitchen faucet, thinking the whole thing would die from lack of attention. It did not. On Friday at 5:41 in the evening, I pulled into my driveway after a 12-hour day replacing copper pipe in a daycare basement. I had groceries sliding around in the passenger seat, sweat dried into the collar of my work shirt, and exactly enough patience left to feed my dog and sit on the porch with a cold beer. Diane was standing beside my gate with her phone against her ear. She looked directly at me and said, "Yes, dispatch. The vehicle has returned. The driver is behaving aggressively, and he is refusing to comply with community law." I had not even opened my door yet. I climbed out slowly and asked who she was talking about. She raised one finger at me like a school principal silencing a child, then told the dispatcher she feared escalation. I remember actually looking around for another aggressive man because surely she could not mean me, standing there with sandwich bread under one arm and a bag of apples in the other. "Diane," I said, "you were calling the police because I parked at my house." She turned away from me and said, "He is confronting me now." 3 sheriff's cruisers arrived before my ice cream had time to melt. The lead deputy was a broad-shouldered man named Raymond Pike, late 50s, gray mustache, calm eyes. The kind of officer who looked like he had already dealt with 6 ridiculous situations that day and was hoping mine would not become number 7. 2 younger deputies stepped out behind him, one watching me, the other watching Diane, while red and blue light rolled across my barn and bounced off the windows of nearby houses. People started appearing on porches almost immediately. Cedar Run had no nightlife, so apparently I was Friday entertainment. Deputy Pike asked me to put the grocery bags down and explain what happened. Before I could finish one sentence, Diane walked over with her binder pressed against her chest and said, "Deputy, this homeowner has repeatedly violated Article 18, subsection 4, concerning oversized commercial vehicles in protected residential zones." Pike looked at me, then at my truck, then back at her. "Ma'am, this looks like a half-ton pickup." Diane opened the binder and produced several pages covered in stamps, signatures, legal descriptions, and what looked like county recording marks. She had tabs. She had highlighted paragraphs. She even had a notarized statement claiming every property along our road had been absorbed into the Cedar Run Community Preservation District 2 years earlier. The documents looked official enough that the younger deputy leaned closer. Pike read silently for a moment, his brow slowly tightening. I felt something cold move through my stomach. I had reviewed my title before purchasing the property. My closing attorney had searched every restriction, easement, lien, and covenant. There had been nothing. Still, there I was under flashing lights while a woman in white pearls explained my own land to me. These filings appear recorded, Pike said carefully. I will need to verify them, but until we do, it might be wise to keep the vehicle behind the gate. It is behind the gate, I said. I pointed at the steel posts on either side of us. You are standing in my driveway. Diane gave a soft little laugh, the kind designed to make me sound unreasonable without her having to say it. Property boundaries do not exempt owners from community obligations. That sentence drew a few murmurs from the neighbors. I looked around and saw people I had helped during an ice storm, people whose driveways I had cleared with my tractor, now watching me like maybe Diane knew something they did not. That was her real talent. She understood that most people do not need proof. They just need permission to doubt you. Pike finally closed the binder and told Diane the sheriff's office would confirm the filings on Monday. He told me no arrest was being made and no citation was being issued. Technically, I had won the moment. It did not feel like winning. Diane stood near her mailbox as the cruisers pulled away, one hand resting on her binder, that polished little smile returning to her face. This could all be handled quietly, she called across the road. I picked up my groceries and asked what she wanted. Cooperation, she said, and respect for the neighborhood. I stared at her for a second, then at the houses behind her, all neat lawns and twitching curtains, and I understood that the truck was never the real problem. I had refused to recognize her authority, and for someone like Diane, that was not disagreement. It was rebellion. That night, just after 9, my phone buzzed with an email from the Cedar Run Community Preservation Office. The subject line read, "Final notice before enforcement. Attached were photographs of my truck taken from 3 different angles. A $500 penalty, and a warning that continued non-compliance could result in immobilization, towing, and a lien against my property." I read it twice, then a third time, hoping exhaustion had made me stupid. At the bottom, beneath a county seal and an electronic signature, was one sentence in bold letters. "Failure to respond will be treated as consent." I sat alone at my kitchen table while my dog scratched at the back door, and for the first time since buying that land, the house did not feel like mine. The next morning, I called the county clerk before I even made coffee. A woman named Evelyn Shaw answered, and after I gave her the parcel number, she went quiet long enough for me to hear keyboard clicks through the phone. "Mr. R. Holloway," she said, "your property has no active association attachment, no covenant amendment, and no preservation district filing of any kind." I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. "So the documents are fake." She hesitated. "I can only tell you they do not match anything in our system." That should have made me feel better, but it did not. Because someone had already used those papers to bring 3 cruisers to my driveway, and once a lie gets flashing lights behind it, people remember the lights more than the truth. Around noon, I stepped outside to check the mail and found a bright yellow wheel clamp locked around the front tire of my truck. A laminated notice had been tucked beneath the windshield wiper. Cedar Run Community Preservation Enforcement. Violation 18-4. Vehicle immobilized pending payment. I stood there with the paper in my hand, listening to wind move through the oak leaves, and felt my pulse begin to throb behind my eyes. I called the number at the bottom. Diane answered on the first ring. "Cedar Run Community Preservation Office." Diane speaking. "You put a boot on my truck. Your vehicle was immobilized after repeated non-compliance." Her voice was smooth, almost cheerful. "You have no authority on my land. That misconception is the reason we are here. The county says there is no association." There was a pause, then a small sigh, like I was exhausting her. "County databases lag behind private filings all the time. Jack, you really should let professionals handle this. Professionals do not sneak onto private property before lunch." "Careful," she said softly. "Threatening language creates additional liability." I hung up because I could feel myself being baited. Less than an hour later, a tow truck rolled through my gate without permission. The driver was a heavy-set man with a shaved head and orange safety vest. He climbed down, looked at the boot, then at me. "Lady across the road says this is an authorized removal." "It is not." He held up a work order. "Looks official." "So does monopoly money," from across the room. He almost smiled. but then he glanced toward Diane's house and saw her filming from the porch. That ended the joke. I had to pay $200 in cash just to have the boo cut off. And even then, the driver warned me Diane had already scheduled a full tow for Monday. By Sunday, orange cones blocked half my entrance. A metal sign appeared beside my mailbox saying restricted parking zone. Another showed up near the barn, claiming the area was under community inspection. I pulled them out and stacked them against the fence, and by evening, they were back. Then came a county code officer named Melvin Cross, walking around with a tablet, taking pictures of my roofline, propane tank, and shed. I asked who had sent him. He said they had received multiple complaints about unsafe commercial activity. What commercial activity? I asked. He pointed toward the truck. The vehicle suggests business use. My boots suggest mud. That does not make this a swamp. He did not laugh. He just wrote something down. The neighborhood began changing around me in small, ugly ways. Tom Grady, who used to wave every morning, suddenly found his steering wheel fascinating whenever he drove past. Mrs. Alfing Coffernay. Belle stopped bringing her terrier near my fence. Two teenagers on bicycles slowed down to film me with their phones, whispering and laughing until I looked their way. Diane had not proven anything, but she had created a version of me everyone could safely dislike. That was the part I had not expected. I thought the fight would be about documents, laws, maybe money. I did not realize how quickly people will abandon a man when standing beside him might make their own lives uncomfortable. On Thursday afternoon, Diane returned with two people I recognized from church, both carrying clipboards. One was Leonard Price, a retired insurance agent who had once asked me to help repair his frozen pipes. The other was Carol Finch, a woman who sold handmade candles and could turn any conversation into a fundraiser. Diane announced they were conducting a compliance inspection. "You are conducting a trespass," I told her. She opened the gate anyway. "This roadway is subject to community access rights." "No, it is subject to a chain, a lock, and my patience." Leonard avoided my eyes. Carol started photographing the truck. Diane measured the distance from my front bumper to the gravel edge, then shook her head like a surgeon discovering a tumor. "Excessive vehicle footprint," she said. "That is not a real thing. It is under emergency aesthetic authority. That is even less real." She looked at me over the top of her glasses. "You mistake disagreement for exemption." I stepped between her and the truck. "Get off my property." Her phone came up immediately. "You are becoming aggressive." "No, I am becoming clear." A tow cable clanked behind me. I turned and saw the same truck from Saturday backing toward my Silverado. I had not even heard it arrive. The driver would not meet my eyes this time. "Do not touch my truck," I said. Diane held out a signed order. "Failure to comply authorizes removal." Signed by who? Chief Inspector Wallace Dean. The name meant nothing to me then. The driver attached the cable. I moved forward, and Leonard finally spoke. "Jack, do not make this worse." That cut deeper than anything Diane had said. I looked at him and asked, "Worse for who?" He had no answer. The winch tightened. My truck lurched backward, and I stood there while the one thing I used to earn a living disappeared through my gate under the authority of paperwork that should not have existed. Diane watched the taillights fade down the road, then turned to me with that same calm expression. Compliance is always cheaper than resistance. I wanted to hate her in a simple way, the way you hate a thief or a bully, but there was something colder in what she was doing. She did not want my truck. She wanted the moment when I stopped believing I could say no. By Monday, my mailbox was packed with violation letters, noise complaints, visual nuisance penalties, unauthorized commercial storage, even one for failure to maintain approved landscaping because my pasture grass was apparently too tall. The grocery delivery service canceled my order after the driver said the property had legal access issues. My business lost 2 jobs because my tools were locked inside an impound yard that refused to release the truck without written authorization from Cedar Run Preservation. I spent hours on the phone, bounced between departments, each person telling me the same thing in a different tone. "If the paperwork is fraudulent, you will need legal counsel." So I borrowed my brother's sedan and drove downtown to meet a lawyer named Howard Vance, an old friend of a friend who worked above a tax office. His room smelled like dust, burnt coffee, and defeated people. He studied Diane's documents for nearly an hour, holding pages to the light, checking seals, comparing signatures. Finally, he leaned back. These are forged. Relief hit me so fast I almost laughed. Then he added, very well forged. He explained that whoever created them understood county formatting, notary placement, lien procedures, and administrative language. To challenge everything properly, we would need a forensic document examiner, certified copies from several offices, emergency motions, depositions, and probably a civil injunction. How much? I asked. He rubbed his jaw. $15,000 to start. I stared at him. She invents an organization, steals my truck, threatens my land, and I have to spend 15 grand to prove reality. Howard gave me a tired look. That is often how fraud works. The criminal creates confusion, then the victim pays to untangle it. I left his office with a folder under my arm and a sick feeling in my stomach. When I got home, a notice was taped to my front door. Emergency community meeting, Thursday, 7 p.m. Agenda: dangerous non-compliant property owner and threat to neighborhood safety. My name was not printed anywhere, but it might as well have been written in blood. I told myself I would not go. I told myself giving Diane an audience would only feed her. Then Thursday evening came, and stare out the window, and stare out the window. The community hall was already full when I arrived. Folding chairs, coffee urns, murmured conversations that stopped when I walked in. Diane stood at the front beneath the projector screen, wearing navy blue, pearls, and the expression of a woman about to announce record profits. Behind her was a photograph of my truck, my driveway, and my face, all framed in red boxes. Thank you for coming, she said. We are here because one individual has chosen personal defiance over shared safety. 20 heads turned toward me at once. She played audio clips of our conversations, cut so tightly that every calm answer sounded like a threat. She showed a form bearing my signature, supposedly acknowledging membership in the preservation district. I had never seen it before. Then she invited public comment. Tom Grady said he was worried about property values. Carol Finch said my hostility had made her feel unsafe. Leonard Price said rules had to mean something. These were people who had borrowed my tools, eaten at my table, called me when pipes burst, and one by one they lined up to describe me like a problem the neighborhood needed to remove. At the end, Diane called for a vote authorizing emergency enforcement and property lien proceedings. 4 board members raised their hands immediately. The 5th, a quiet man named Calvin Reese, hesitated. He looked at me for one long second, and for that second I thought someone might finally stand up. Then his hand rose too, unanimous. Diane smiled as applause moved through the room. I walked outside before it finished, stood alone beneath a buzzing parking lot light, and understood how easily decent people can become part of something cruel when cruelty is presented as procedure. I got home after dark and found another notice on my porch. This one morning that a lien would be filed within 72 hours. I sat on the steps until after midnight, listening to crickets and staring at the empty place where my truck should have been, wondering whether Diane had already won. Then, just before 1 in the morning, my phone lit up with an email from an address I did not recognize. It contained only 2 sentences. Check County Ordinance 97. Retroactive covenanters require unanimous owner consent. Then verified Chief Inspector Wallace Dean against the state licensing database. I opened my laptop, typed in the name, and felt every hair on my arms rise. Wallace Dean had been dead for 3 years. That discovery did not make me feel relieved. It made me feel awake. For weeks, Diane had kept me reacting. One notice at a time, one humiliation at a time, and every time I tried to defend myself, she handed me another crisis before I could understand the last one. But a dead inspector could not sign a towing order. A dead man could not approve an emergency lien. And once I saw that, the whole machine stopped looking invincible and started looking sloppy. I spent the next 2 days pulling records until my eyes burned. County Ordinance 97 was exactly what the email claimed. Any retroactive covenant required written consent from every affected property owner. And there was no consent on file for me, from the previous owner, or from 3 other families along the road. The recording numbers on Diane's documents did not match county formatting. One seal had been copied from a drainage easement, filed 8 years earlier. Another notary stamp belonged to a woman who had retired before the supposed signing date. My alleged signature had been lifted from a plumbing permit I filed the year before and pasted onto a fake acknowledgement form. I found the original online and sat there staring at the 2 signatures side by side. The same crooked H, the same ink break in the second L. Every tiny imperfection duplicated. She had not guessed my name. She had harvested it. That was when fear turned into anger. Not the loud kind that makes you punch walls. The useful kind. The kind that makes you label folders and backup files. I saved everything to 3 flash drives, emailed copies to my brother, printed 2 complete sets, and put one inside the old freezer in my barn, because nobody ever looks in a dead man's freezer except a raccoon. Late Saturday afternoon, another message arrived from the anonymous account. She files the lien Monday morning. Meet me tonight at 7. Mabel Ben Park. Bench by the river. Come alone. I knew how stupid that sounded. Every bad decision in every crime movie begins with a man ignoring the sentence "come alone." But desperation makes risk feel a lot like hope. I parked a block away and walked down toward the river with the folder tucked under my jacket. The park was nearly empty. Just a woman pushing a stroller and an old man feeding ducks, things ducks probably should not eat. A figure sat on the bench beneath a sycamore tree, shoulder square, hands resting on his knees. When he turned, I stopped walking. Calvin Reese, the board member who had looked me in the eye before raising his hand against me. "You have got about 5 seconds, I said. He stood slowly. "I do not blame you. That makes one of us." He reached inside his coat and pulled out a leather case. The badge inside caught the last orange light from the river. Special Investigator Caleb Ross, County Financial Crimes Unit. Calvin Reese was a cover identity. He told me to sit, and for a few seconds I could not. My brain had taken enough abuse from reality lately. He explained that Diane Pritchard was not running one fake neighborhood association. She was part of a regional extortion operation that targeted rural homeowners, widows, retirees, and anyone unlikely to understand how quickly fraudulent filings could become real financial pressure. Fake dues became fake fines became liens, and liens became forced sales through shell companies tied back to the same group. "We have 43 confirmed victims," he said. "Probably more." I stared at him. "And you sat there while they took my truck." His jaw tightened. I had to stay inside the board. If I broke cover early, she would disappear and take the rest of them with her. "You could have warned me." "Not without risking the case." I wanted to hit him. I also knew he was telling the truth. He opened my folder, scanned the copies, then looked up with something close to respect. "You found the signature source. She used my permit. We suspected document harvesting, but we could not prove the method." He told me Diane planned to call 911 again Monday morning. Same routine, same claims. Only this time she would present the lien package and request immediate removal of my remaining equipment from the property. Warrants were ready. Deputies were briefed. They needed her to present the fraudulent documents and identify herself as the authorized officer. "You want me to let her do it again?" I said. "One last time." Sunday night, I did not sleep. I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee that went cold before midnight and watched the light in Diane's upstairs window click on and off. At 8 the next morning, my phone rang. Her voice came through warm and professional. "Jack, I am offering you one final opportunity to resolve this privately." How generous? Sarcasm will not help you. The lien is prepared. If your truck returns to the property, law enforcement will be contacted. I looked across the road and saw her curtain move. She was watching me while she spoke. "Then, I guess you should make the call," I said. I hung up, drove to the impound yard with the release order Caleb's team had arranged, got my Silverado back, and stopped for groceries on the way home. Milk, bread, eggs, dog food, almost exactly what I had been carrying the first time. Maybe that was petty. Maybe it was theater. Sometimes justice needs a prop. I pulled into my driveway at 9:17 and parked in the same spot beside the oak tree. Diane appeared before I had even shut off the engine. Phone already at her ear. Binder under one arm. "Yes, dispatch," she said loudly. "The subject has returned. He is violating an active property order, and I believe he may become dangerous." I stepped out with the grocery bags and leaned against the truck. "Morning, Diane." She smiled at me, small and victorious. 3 cruisers came down the road, but this time there was no panic in my chest. Deputy Raymond Pike stepped out first, followed by 2 officers and Caleb, now wearing a badge instead of a cardigan. Diane's smile faltered for half a second. Then she recovered. "Deputy, thank goodness. I have the lien documents and emergency authorization right here." Pike accepted the folder. And you are acting as president and enforcement director of the Cedar Run Community Preservation District? That is correct. You prepared these filings? Under board authority. Yes. Pike closed the folder. Diane Pritchard, you are under arrest for forgery, wire fraud, attempted extortion, filing false instruments, and conspiracy to commit property theft. She stared at him like he had begun speaking another language. No, you are confused. He is the violator. One deputy took her wrist. Diane jerked away. Do not touch me. I am a recognized officer of this community. Caleb stepped forward. There is no recognized community district. For the first time since I had met her, Diane had no polished answer. Her face changed, the confidence peeling away layer by layer, until all that remained was panic. Neighbors gathered along the road, silent, watching the same lights that had once made me look guilty flash across her white blazer. She twisted toward me as the cuffs clicked shut. Do you think this makes you right? She shouted. These people needed order. No, I said. You needed obedience. Pike turned toward the crowd and explained that my property had never belonged to an association, and that Diane's organization was part of a multi-county fraud investigation. Nobody cheered. Real shame is usually quiet. Tom Grady stared at the ground. Carol covered her mouth. Leonard looked 10 years older. Mrs. Bell walked over after the cruiser left and tried to apologize, but the words kept breaking apart in her throat. I told her I understood, though I did not forgive them all at once. Forgiveness is not a switch. It is more like repairing an old fence, one post at a time, and some boards never sit straight again. The story hit the news that weekend. 43 victims became 51. Families had paid fake assessments. Retirees had borrowed money to avoid fake foreclosure notices, and 2 properties had already been transferred through shell companies. My files helped connect Diane's signatures to the document harvesting system, and my plumbing permit became Exhibit 12 in a federal case. A month later, the fake district was dissolved. The liens were erased, and my truck sat exactly where it belonged. Neighbors started leaving pies, notes, and awkward little gifts by my mailbox. One card said, "Thank you for standing up when the rest of us stayed quiet." I kept that one. I also kept one of Diane's forged notices framed above my desk, not as a trophy, but as a warning. A seal can be copied. A signature can be stolen. A confident voice can turn nonsense into policy if enough people are afraid to ask questions. A few months later, I received a letter from the county jail. Diane wrote that I had only cut off one head, that people like her would always exist because communities secretly want someone else to make the hard decisions. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer because the worst part was, she was not entirely wrong. There will always be someone who calls control safety, who calls silence peace, who hides greed behind rules and a polite smile. The difference is whether everyone else looks away. So tell me what you think. Was I right to fight her every step of the way, or should I have paid the fine and avoided the damage to the neighborhood? Have you ever watched someone use fake authority, paperwork, or public pressure to control people who are too scared to push back? Share your story, because sometimes the person standing alone in their driveway does not need another rule. They just need to know they are not crazy.